Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Sunday session on the skills you need to be successful at college. We are talking about skills that go beyond just the classroom. My name is Dennis. I'm going to be with you for the next hour, along with our special guest, to really help you feel more comfortable with more than just the grades, more than just the test scores. And definitely tell us in the chat, fill out the polls and tell us in the chat. Have you been in that group before? Have you felt like at times it's just about the scores that you're getting in class? It's just about cramming and memorizing. And what we want to do today is really kind of dive into some myths and kind of break apart some common assumptions about how you're going to get the success that you need in college and even beyond that. So really excited to be here and really pumped to be able to share this information with you. So what we have today is our guest from the ACT. His name's Cory. He is a senior product manager. Welcome, Cory. Great to have you here. And Cory works specifically on developing products to help students better understand what they need for social and emotional learning. Cory, do we want to start with that? Can I just have you jump right in here and kind of, if you had to explain to someone what your job is about, what that even means to a student, can we start with just what is this field? What is it that you work on a regular basis?
Sure. First of all, I want to thank you guys for having me today. I'm excited to talk about SEL and how we can help students prepare for college, and not only college and high school, but beyond that. Once students enter the workforce, they are literally the future of our workforce in all of the industries across the nation and the world. So a lot of these SEL skills, which we'll talk about today, excuse me, go into soft skills in the workforce. They also help students improve their grades in school. So I think the most common misconception when we're talking about social and emotional skills, Dennis, is that it has a lot to do with mental health. And that's not really the direction, at least at ACT, that we look at SEL skills. That's not really the scope that we look at SEL skills with. Go ahead, did you have a question?
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, as we dive into this, guys, you all out there, definitely chat us your specific questions. I mean, Cory, you've said a lot of, I think, great things already. How many of you feel like it feels like an excuse sometimes when you say, I'm too stressed out to study, or I can't do well on this test because I'm just freaking out. And it's just not something that anyone ever addresses for you. It's not something that anyone ever talks to you about. And, we all want to do well in school, right, Cory? We all want to do well in the workplace. And it takes more than just being able to regurgitate hours of studying in a short period of time to be able to be successful in that, right? So I just want to frame this up real quick and say, let's have real talk here. And I'm not talking about like keeping it real, but what I mean is, like, if you have specific instances, things that you're going through yourself, definitely chat them out, ask questions. That's why we have Cory here. Cory's going to connect all those feelings to actual science, to actual studies that we're going to be able to learn from and hopefully take away from. So I love that. I mean, a lot of students, so I've been teaching test prep for over 13 years, and a lot of times students, that's their main blocker. They just don't know what they need beyond just tons of time to study. So I don't know, Cory, I don't know if that helps, but like, I feel like that's something that you must hear a lot from students as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So beyond the grades, what do we want as students and eventually as professionals? We want to be able to apply the knowledge that we do have. We want to be able to manage our emotions, set and achieve our goals. And I really think that's where SEL can help a lot. So if we take mental health out of the equation when we're talking about SEL, and we really focus on how do we achieve what we want to achieve in a healthy way, how do we manage our emotions when things don't go our way? Because as we all know, that's inevitable at times.
Yeah.
Going through that adversity, excuse me.
Yeah, no, makes sense. And we got a
coming out the
guest
other side.
2000 here who uses it all the time, and that's great. So let's start with that. Like, you say SEL, that's the acronym for social and emotional learning, right? But what are the skills that students, what are the words that they're going to recognize? What are the things that they probably hear all the time from their teachers or from their peers, right?
Yep, absolutely. So at ACT, we look at 5 SEL constructs, or SEL skills specifically. And
Yeah.
those are grit,
Yeah.
resilience, teamwork, leadership, and curiosity. And I'm
Yeah.
going to go through some of the definitions for those 5 here as well, Dennis.
Yeah,
So
let's go through them one by one. Those words sound great to me. Those are the words I see on wholesome memes or get motivated on Reddit. I don't know if anyone is a Redditor out there, but we hear that all the time, right? We hear about hang in there, persevere, keep working, don't give up. I'd actually, before we dive into those skills, can I take a step back real quick? Because I will say something I've been really wanting to ask you about, Cory, is one of the main things that I teach in the classroom, and a lot of teachers do, is, and I've been told it's kind of the overarching mindset that students need to have, which is growth mindset. When we think about just even students who hold themselves back because they don't think that they can improve, like, let me start with that. Like, before we even have the skills, is it true you can't learn these skills? Like, are you just born with, leadership? Are you just born with the ability to persevere, right? Like, I'm curious about that.
no, I would say it's quite the contrary, Dennis. So I think what you're going to hear me say a lot throughout this next hour is the word research, and that is because at ACT we are first and foremost a research-based company. So
Okay.
I would say with SEL, the research indicates not only do these skills develop over time, even some studies will indicate into your 60s and 70s these skills will change. But not only that, these skills are transient even in the moment. So your grit, if you're playing sports on the basketball court, might be at one level, whereas in the classroom, in that same moment in time, your grit could be at another level. So I would say the research on a couple of different fronts indicate that these skills develop over time, and they're different even in the moment.
Yeah, I like that. And we've got a poll open right now. If you guys want to chime in, if you're not comfortable chatting, totally fine. I get it. It's a Sunday afternoon. Maybe your eyes are on the TV watching something else at the same time. It's totally cool. But if you want to let us know what skills you're most interested in, we can talk about it. Well, let's dive in, Cory. I want to get a better understanding of what these specific 5 skills are. And if you're out there, you just heard Cory tell you, you can improve on these, right? These are not skills that you just have or you don't. This is something that you can actively work at. So I will tell you, and I think when we talked earlier, Cory, grit is probably one of the most important. I mean, they're all important, right? But let's start with grit. What is grit? Like, what does that even mean to a student?
Yeah, so ACT's definition of grit is the extent to which a student's actions demonstrate persistence, goal striving, reliability, dependability, and attention to detail. And I think before we even get into too deeply into the definitions,
Yeah.
but what I really want students to understand is these words are pretty interchangeable. So if you look up definitions of SEL skills on Google, you might see grit defined as goal striving or persistence. The word that we use is not necessarily important. It's really what the word represents and the actions that we take to improve that. So when we're talking about grit, and I do agree that's one of the most important ones, and I do probably think that that's the one we see in memes the most, inspirational memes and stuff like that.
Yeah. Never give up, right?
Yeah.
Is that what it is? Yep.
Exactly. Yeah. So grit, what are we talking about here? We're talking about when you set that goal, and preferably it's a SMART goal, what are you going to have to go through in order to achieve it? So the first thing we're going to have to do is break it down. So attention to detail.
Yeah.
And obviously that attention to detail will serve you well in school when you're looking to improve your grades and achieve scores on the ACT. But it will also help you when you get into your professional and personal life as well. What goals do you have for yourself? How effective are you at breaking those down, being dependable, showing up every day, and being reliable?
I want to get back to it in a little bit because you're talking a lot about setting goals. And I don't know if that's something that I actively did at that age, right? Like for me, goals, I think were, let me pass this class or let me get the highest GPA possible. I don't know if I set other kinds of goals that I could persevere at. I don't know if you in the audience feel the same way. Maybe we can come back to it in a little bit because that's definitely something we can talk more about. So grit is hanging in there, sticking to your goals and just continuing to work at it. And it doesn't matter how, like, it doesn't matter. And maybe I can touch upon this a little, like, what kind of goals should you set? Are we talking like real manageable things that you do on a regular basis, like habit forming goals? Or are we talking like I want to play in the NBA or something along those lines? Like, what is there a preference that you have for students?
No, and yeah, absolutely. And I would say that goal setting is a big part of grit because you hear it all the time. Your willpower is only going to take you so far. And while that is absolutely part of grit, preparing to achieve a goal, part of that is setting a goal that is achievable, that you can break it down into smaller steps. So I would say that goal setting is a major part of grit, and it's something that we should put at the forefront when we talk about that word.
Okay. We'll come back to that. Resilience is taking the lead in this poll, Cory. So let's touch upon that next. To me, resilience sounds a lot like grit. Like, what's the difference here? Why is that a separate skill that you all focus on?
Right. So the way that we define resilience is the extent to which a student's actions demonstrate stress management, emotional regulation, a positive response to setbacks, and poise. So the difference between resilience and grit, in my mind, Dennis, is resilience comes into play when you're going through that adversity that we talked about a little bit earlier. So things are not always going to go your way, especially if the goal that you're striving towards, whether it's in school, in your personal life, in your professional life. If that's a long-term goal that's spanning over years, you're going to run into long periods of adversity. And I think that's where resilience comes into play. How can you regulate your emotions so that you can still show up every day with a positive attitude and just being optimistic in response to setbacks?
So if I'm hearing it correctly, grit is like just being persistent, just creating the right kind of habits, sticking in there. Resilience is like, you just got punched in the face, right? Everyone has a plan until get punched in the face. I don't know if I screwed up that quote, but the point is, like, something bad happened. Do you hang in there, right? It goes beyond that. That adversity is something that you have to be ready to deal with. And I want to talk about that more for sure. Does that sound right? Yeah.
That's exactly how I would define them. And I would say a key word for resilience in the definition for us here at ACT is poise. How do you react in those moments of adversity? So if you think about a pitcher on the mound in a baseball game, in a big moment, what's your heartbeat like? How do you react when the first batter of the game hits a home run off of you? Because that's a tough moment, but if you're not careful, that can spiral into a bigger inning or a more difficult game or a more difficult situation.
Yeah, let's take a timeout right there. I'd love to hear from folks in the chat. Like, what was a moment that you felt that? Was it a test? Was it a sport? Was it a moment in sports? Was it you trying to go bowling? Right? What was it where everything felt like the weight of the world was on your shoulders, right? And we've got two awesome teachers in the chat as well, Teacher Boris and Teacher Kerry. So I know, again, this may not be something that you want to share too openly, but if you can, this is a chance for you to get answers about some of these things that you may want to work on. So that's awesome, Cory. That's a great analogy. Thank you for that. Looks like up next, teamwork is a big one too. What do you got? I think we all know what teamwork is, right? But is there anything that students might not know about how you look at it from a...
Yeah, I think a couple of things that come to my mind, and again, I won't read through the exact definition, but it's collaboration, it's empathy, helpfulness, trust. So, we all know what the definition of teamwork is, but I would really stick to empathy as one of the keys to teamwork, because you can work well in a team and shoulder a lot of work when it comes to a group project or something like that. But if you don't have the ability to see what challenges your teammate is going through and relate to those, that's going to be a pretty big barrier to developing your teamwork skill. So I think empathy is a big one when it comes to teamwork. And then later on in your career, leadership. Empathy is really big when it comes to leadership, which I know we'll get into here in a little bit.
Yeah, let's just transition right to it. Sounds like everything's tied together anyway, right? But what's leadership for you?
Well, I think leadership is, to go into the definition, assertiveness, influence, optimism, enthusiasm. It's really taking the other four of these SEL skills that we look at, and it's putting them into a vehicle where you can help others develop those skills as well. So whether you're a manager in the workforce, or you're in that group project, or you're a teacher, developing your leadership skills can really go a long way in any of those areas. Right. And sticking with empathy, if you're a manager and you don't know what it's like to be someone on your team that is reporting to you, or you can't relate to them in any way and the trials and tribulations that they go through, you're going to have a difficult time managing their emotions and getting the best out of your employees, which is obviously the goal of every manager.
Yeah, I like that, Cory. And I like that you're tying it to more than just school. I think, like you said, these skills are things that you're going to use forever. So And then let's just close it out with curiosity. How would you define that? I'm actually, I'll be honest, I'm a little surprised that this is, I mean, it makes sense that this is something that would be important to a student's ability to learn, but what is about curiosity that really makes it important for you to dive into?
Yeah, I think curiosity is really the ingredient that can tie this all together for us, Dennis. I would say that it's out of the five, it might be the least sexy, quote unquote,
Okay.
to look at. But when we're talking about things like inquisitiveness, flexibility, open-mindedness, those are the way that we develop our weaknesses. So a lot of these are ways that we look at our strengths and maybe could further develop those. But what are we not so great at? And how do we embrace diversity so that we understand that we do need to improve in other areas and not just flex in
Uh,
terms of our strengths?
that makes sense, right? Like if you don't have curiosity, you're not here today giving up your time listening to, two guys you've never met talk about these skills that just aren't really covered in school, right? So you're here, you want to hear more, you want to learn more. Let's dive into some of the practical things. So you've heard so far the different definitions. Anything surprise you? Anything you hear that you want to talk into? And real quick, looks like a lot of folks are playing 1-on-10 dodgeball, or at least one is. That's pretty impressive. Uh, finals, AP season, last chance meet to qualify for states and hurdles. Really specific. Cory, that resonates, right? I feel like everything here is tied to that.
Absolutely.
Racing, yeah.
And I would say that even the attendance at a webinar like this with a really interesting title speaks to the attendees' curiosity as well. That's the type of thing where you want to expose yourself to different situations and learn things that you might not already have a familiarity with.
Yeah. Okay. So next question. I want to dive more into a couple things I've heard is setting goals the right way. Empathy with others is another big one, right? And then just having the willingness to dive into things that you may not be good at. And those are probably three I want to dive into more. But uh, what can you tell these students about school? Like why should they even care about these 5 skills in school? Like what are some of the studies you've seen or some of the statistics that you've seen that make this something that is worthwhile?
Yeah, absolutely. I think specifically in school, Dennis, what we see when schools and even individual students invest in their SEL skill development, we see some expected improvements where we would think, okay, grades would improve if we improve grit, or grades would improve if we improve resilience. But we also see things like attendance going up, uh, school climate within each of these individual students going up, within each of these individual schools and districts going up. And what we can draw some conclusions from there based on research is that when we improve, the ability for example, a student to manage their emotions or to deal with stress, that has a concurrent effect on the school climate, because if we're all improving just a little bit, the school and the district are going to improve, and we're going to have a better positive relationship with our teachers. So I would say not only improvement in grades, but improve sense of self, improve interactions with others, and those are all huge things, hugely important things when it comes to class and to improving the school climate as well. Does that make sense?
It makes a ton of sense. I'm going to bring you back because we got a ton in the chat about leadership that we want to hear more about. So let's do a
Okay.
quick recap of that because,
Yeah.
I mean, I got to guess, and let me know if I'm right. Leadership is one of the things that is most looked at in college applications. I feel like of these five, right? Like college applications don't really ask for, I mean, I guess they ask for like name a time when you stuck it through or had, were determined or faced adversity, but leadership is definitely something that students are asked about. So what can you tell us more? Let's do a quick rerun of what leadership means at this level, at this like study level.
Yeah, so some of the words that are associated with leadership at ACT are assertiveness, influence, optimism, enthusiasm, and those are all great words that we all recognize. But I think what I see as challenges with leadership quite often are students and even others asking a student, "Are you a leader?" And we only look at it at that moment in time, when the question that I think we should be asking is, "How can you improve your leadership skills so that you can become a better leader?" So I think a lot of it is what question are we asking? And when it comes to leadership, how are you able to influence a conversation? How are you assertive enough to inject your opinion when you know that it is the direction that either the group project or the project at work should be going. And then optimism, because we all know that you are the people that you surround yourself with, right? So in that room with a group project, are you coming to the table with solutions, or are you focusing more on problems? So I think a lot of the adjectives that are associated with leadership are adjectives that we would want every individual to embody. And then at the leadership level, it's really, are you able to project those onto others?
Yeah. Well, okay. Let's talk about that a little bit more. I had a comment coming from Jin about how are you a good leader though when you're with a group of people that aren't motivated? I'm guessing that happens in school more often than not, maybe in the workplace too, I'm sure. But in school specifically, how do you lead that group to where they need to be? Because maybe you don't have the choice of surrounding yourself with folks who are optimistic, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe you're just being looked at as someone who needs to make them do work, but they're just not into it. Like how, maybe they don't have the same level of skills in these areas. What's some of the advice that you would give?
Yeah, I think a good leader has to be an amoeba, Dennis. So I think that a good leader gets into that room and recognizes pretty quickly, what do I have here? Like, what is this team? What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses of this team? And what do I need to do as a leader to improve our chances of whatever it is, completing a project, completing a work project? And I think in some cases, it'll be more getting your hands dirty and doing a lot more of the legwork than you would be accustomed to as a leader. But I think in a lot of cases, it's empowering others. And okay, maybe this person isn't necessarily motivated to do this piece of the project, but can you ask them what areas they would be interested in, and maybe fine tune things a little bit in order to really optimize the whole team.
So what I'm hearing is it can't just be about you, right?
Right.
I guess what I mean that
it almost
what I mean by
never
that
is actually. It almost never is.
Yeah, it can't just be about like, oh, I'm a leader and I'm going to inspire my group members to all of a sudden be excited about something they've never been excited about. That's not the definition of leadership, right? It's not like the movie style where someone just makes a speech, like, I don't know if you guys saw Independence Day, that was a long time ago, but like, where someone makes a speech and gets everyone excited for battle or whatever it is. What I'm hearing a lot from you is you've got to be able to understand the context of where your group members come from. You got to be able to understand what drives them, what motivates them, I guess that ties back to the empathy you were talking about earlier, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think empathy is a big one, because if you're a business owner and you are wondering why your part-time employees don't have as much passion for the business as you, well, it's because they're part-time employees and they're not bringing in the amount of passion that you are to the table, because it's not their business, it's a job for them. So without understanding that, you're going to have a difficult time getting the most out of those employees, if that makes sense.
It makes a ton of sense. And how do you get that perspective though, right? Like I mean, I guess that's step one, is just recognizing that, right? Mm-hmm. Step one is recognizing that I've got to figure out what makes people click. I've got to figure out what brings them to the table. What are the things they are going to work on? And being okay with the fact that some may do one thing and not do another, and that you might have to do more work, as you said, Cory, initially, right? But what are some of the other ways you think that we can improve that? Like how do I get that perspective to be able to just, I mean, it's tiring. I mean, tell me in the chat, like how many of you have been in this situation where you're like, you feel stuck. You're like, I know I need to be the one to make us do things, but it's just not happening. Like, what are some of the challenges you run into? I'd love to hear and have us kind of discuss it, but yep.
Yeah, I think what we're getting to is the leadership is hard work. I think that's one of the things that you're going to have to do in order to improve your leadership is just have that experience. Without a doubt, there are, what we define as natural leaders. But I think for the majority of us, you have to have that experience of maybe some difficult interactions and maybe, something along the lines of a second tier manager job first before you develop into someone that can lead an entire organization.
Yeah. Oh, I like this one. So Jin, thank you. You are feeding us some great questions and we'd love to hear from more of you. But what happens if you've got leadership, like a power struggle going on, Cory? Like that, we've seen that happen before, right? Egos get in the way, or two students want credit for being the leader, right? Like I mean, maybe we're getting but I'd love to hear your thoughts. Like, are there ways that you can kind of how do you get that common ground so that you can have a meaningful or just a productive discussion about the direction that a group should go? Like, have you seen some exercises or ways that help those students kind of align together? Is that something,
Yeah,
Juvis?
so I'm really happy we had this question actually, because I think this is the type of scenario where the skill of curiosity comes into play, Dennis. Whereas I mentioned that, it's not the sexiest one of the SEL skills, but if you have another leader that you're sharing the burden with, and maybe you don't see eye to eye, how are you able to remain flexible, open-minded? How are you able to embrace that diversity of thought within the group? Because if the two leaders at the top aren't going to work well together, the group is not going to be successful. It's as simple as that. So again, I think it really speaks to the flexibility of a leader, and I think that's a key adjective when it comes to leadership. And if there are two leaders at the head of a group, they need to be able to work well together, even if they have opposing mindsets when it comes to daily tasks or what the goal of the project is.
Yeah, or they can make a lot of cake for each other. It looks like that's a strategy that has been working. But no, I hear you, Cory. I mean, I want to move off this topic for a moment because I think we can always come back to this. But look, leadership. It sounds like what my takeaway anyway. Let me know if I'm right, or you can tell me. Is just about understanding others, being aware of what drives others, being aware of what. In this case, cake might be enough to motivate others to come, right, to a meeting or to something that they may not come to normally. And just being able to provide whatever it is to make them have that, I guess, common ground, that communication to be able to be flexible and to figure out how to make things work. It's going to be hard work on everyone's end, but you're going to have to figure out how to make that happen, right?
Yep, I would say that's right.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I want to stay on this topic though, right? Like, I think leadership, it sounds like you're saying, get in there, get that experience, whether it's a second tier job, like even if it's just a group project, there's so much you can learn about how other people interact, other people work. I've got, I hear this a lot from students about how there was always one person who did nothing and he blew up the entire project. And maybe we can talk about that. But, what are some of the things, what are some ways, what are some specific activities that students could do to improve on the things we've talked about, right? Like what are some things that you've seen work, you've done studies on, and that every student should just be aware of, whether they do it or not? They should just be aware that this is a thing that they should know works for students.
Sure, absolutely. So I can go through a few different activities for each of those 5 skills if you'd like, Dennis. Is that a good place to go? Yeah.
I love it. What's your favorite? Like what is the one where you were like, whoa, like the results here, if I had it my way, every student should be doing this. Is there one?
Yep, there's a big one for me, and it's around the definition of resilience and ways to improve that. So just to harpen back to that for a moment,
Yeah.
Resilience is emotional regulation, stress management. How do we respond to setbacks?
Yeah.
And something that we've seen through research and scientific data improve resilience is the keeping of a gratitude journal.
No.
And this can help students, it can help professionals. But the keeping of a gratitude journal forces you, whether it be at the beginning of the day or at the end of the day, to think back on what occurred throughout that day. And I think a lot of times we all have a tendency to think about the negatives. Oh, like I wish I had said this in that meeting, or I wish we had made a different decision. But the gratitude journal forces you to think back on some positives throughout the day. And I think more often than not, Dennis, the positives are either going to have the same number or even well surpass the negatives, because the one big negative in our minds can really overtake 5 little positives that in the grand scheme of things can take us a long way. So I would say, go ahead.
No. So gratitude journal, as in literally just write down things you're thankful for. Is that as simple as that?
Yeah, I would say that, at the end of the day, write down 3 things that you're grateful for that happened that day. That would be the simple way to do it. There are also plenty of great products on the market in terms of gratitude journals. So, but that's a great start. Just writing down a few things that happened that day that really move the needle.
I'll be honest. I'm one of the students, and let me know if this resonates with you. I'm one of the ones who stay up late at night and kind of replay moments where I said something cringy or I said something embarrassing, or, like I had a chance to really make a good comment in class and just, it didn't happen, right? It still happens today, but this works. Like, so you've seen studies that show gratitude journal helps you deal with stress better. Is that really a thing?
Yep, I would say it helps you manage stress better. And what we also have seen is in the face of adversity, when you're dealing with times where you need resilience, you can harken back to those positives from the day prior,
Huh.
just because you had a moment to sit down, think about them, whereas you might not have if you didn't do an intentional act like keeping a gratitude journal.
I do something similar with students. It's not necessarily what you're grateful for, but what I do is I force them to reflect on what they just did. Like if they just did a question, I give them a chance to really, like, hey, you never think about the work you just did. Take a moment to think. Is it kind of like that? Is it just really just acknowledging that you've put in the work, that you've done this thing, and it's just not taking for granted the grit that you put into to even put yourself in this spot. Is that sound like a good way to
Yeah,
describe it?
absolutely. I think just having that designated time where you think about, oh yeah, these are the positive things that happened today, as
Okay.
opposed to, when you lay down at night thinking, like you said, I should have said this in that meeting, or we should have made a different decision at the office, and it didn't have the best outcome that we wanted. But what were the five things or the three things, or even one thing? You really don't have to think too deeply into it. Just something that designated time to reflect on some positives from the day
Yeah.
goes a
Cool.
long way. Goes a long way.
Cool. Before we get into another exercise, a question that came up. I think this is an interesting one. What if you don't want to be a leader? What if you what if you want to skip the hard work and it's just fine for you to contribute in your own way? Well, any take on that? Any thoughts on that? Like, can someone opt out of one of these skills just because they say so?
Well, I would say sticking to leadership, I think there are a lot of different ways to be a leader. I think we always think about, upper management in the office or the leader of a group project. But if you look at the definition of leadership, at least the way that ACT defines it, it's a lot of optimism and enthusiasm.
Hmm.
So I think that if we think about those adjectives, even if you're not the head of a group project, you can bring optimism to the table as someone that's doing more of the legwork or that's not leading the group. You can bring enthusiasm to the table even with your one task that you're looking to accomplish. And in the grand scheme of things, that group will benefit from that, even if you're not the head of the group.
That makes a ton of sense. So you don't have to be the shot caller necessarily to be the leader. You can be, so one thing that I talk about at work a lot is being a change leader, right? So you may not be the one making the decisions at the top in order to make something happen or change, how the direction of things, but you can be one of the contributing support members who are help following that path, helping others see how you can be optimistic, how you can contribute, even though you're not doing the hard work of trying to, like, oh, Dennis, he doesn't really care about this project. It's not my job to take care of him. Fine. But there are other ways you can influence, it sounds like, with that optimism, right? I think I think that's important for students to hear that, right? Like, I think.
Absolutely. And I think we all have those people in our lives, whether it be in the classroom or even within a friend group. We're drawn to their personality and their optimism. And I think it is because we relate to their enthusiasm, and it does affect the group. So I think even if you're not, like you said, the shot caller of the group,
Yeah.
I think if you do have your assigned task or two tasks that you need to complete, and every time it's time for an update, you bring that optimism and enthusiasm, that is another way of being more maybe of a servant leader than a traditional leader, but it's still leadership nonetheless.
Yeah. Okay. So it's starting to come together for me. I know we're a little bit past the midway point, so keep the questions coming. I saw some people say the sixth man. They love the way you framed it, Cory, and no surprise. I think every time I talk to you about this, I learn something new, right? And so I'll be honest. Before I talk to you about it, for me, it was all this felt just a little hokey pokey, only because they're not sexy, as you said, right? And they're not necessarily things that are emphasized by teachers or administrators around us. But here's a question that came out: like, how do we stand out? Like, how does this? I'm starting to see how my empathy is important. I want to get back to goal setting in a little bit. I'm starting to see how I can contribute in ways that are, I don't need to be in a specific role to do it. It's less about me and more about how I'm able to understand others and perceive kind of the challenges ahead of me. So for someone who's asking, how do I stand out? Like, what are the things that you see where you're like, that's a leader, or that's grit, or that's resilience? Are there anything that comes to mind that where you're like, whoa, like off the charts?
Yeah, I'm not sure that there is a single definition of how to stand out, but I think if we transition just for a moment, Dennis, to
Yeah.
look at how some of these SEL skills can translate to the workforce, there were a couple of studies, research studies that Google did within their own offices, and one of them was, and we're going to pull up a screen here for a moment, Project Oxygen and Project Aristotle. And Project Oxygen focused on managers and effective management at Google, and the other was focusing on teams, and that was Project Aristotle and what makes an effective team. And they both really yielded a lot of the same results as to what the really important facets to a team were there. And you can see up on the screen that the top 7 of the skills, and these were 2 different projects and with 2 different research teams at Google, yielded the same results and the same skills that were important. And that's being a good coach, communication skills. And if you see them all down the line from 1 through 7, different words being used, but all of these can be tied to one of the SEL skills. And the way I would interpret number 8 in STEM skills, those are the technical skills of the job too. So if we're looking at how to stand out, it's a lot of these soft skills as they're termed in the workforce. So showing up on time, things that we hear all the time that maybe go back to the recesses of our mind, and then when we start a job and we're a year or 2 years in, some of these good habits sometimes fall by the wayside. But those that really are in the office every day on time, and are able to collaborate well with others, that does stand out.
No, it makes a lot of sense. I like that you've brought this up. I remember you talking about these 2 projects. For me, it's the way, I guess the word I jump on is soft, as in soft skills. And why I say that is like, this isn't, let me know if this sounds right. Students shouldn't look at this as like a way to beat someone in a test grade, the same way they do with test scores or other quantitative measures. I know you're working on some products that maybe help students identify where they need to work on more than others. But for the most part, this isn't like, these are things you should do all the time, no matter what, and will yield good results if you have these skills backing you up, and you're just consistent about them, and you just continue to value them as you work forward. Does that sound right, Cory? Does that?
Yep, absolutely. And it's interesting because I just had a conversation with one of our workforce customers, and he said something very interesting to me. He said that he hires based on experience and skills in the resume, but a lot of times when he's forced to let somebody go, it's because of these behavioral challenges that they may have and some of their lack of soft skills. The other thing that I want to mention is the importance of not really comparing yourselves. This is not an area where it is, okay, I have an 88 and the other person has a 92. There's no way to define SEL skills with the number grade like that. Without a doubt, you can identify areas where you need to improve. But I would say more often than not, just exposure to the idea that these skills can improve, and the growth mindset goes a long way. And then there are certainly grades, activities that you can implement to help yourself improve.
Yeah, I before we dive into those activities again, because I've already made notes to start a gratitude journal, and maybe Cory, I'll share with you later on, and you can tell me if I'm doing it right. But growth mindset is so important for students. I will tell you in my classes, I find that can be the one difference between a student who makes huge improvements in their score, because I think in today's world, we're told we can't do things. We're told no. We're told like, you're just not cut out for it, or this is just not for you, do something else. And a lot of times when we do face adversity or we get something wrong, we put it aside. Like, we don't need to look at it. We're not forced to look at it. We're not engaging with things we're bad at. But the reality is, Cory, and I know this is a big part of this, that curiosity of, oh, I'm bad today, but could I be better tomorrow with just a little bit of practice? I think that's the message all students need to hear. It's that there is something here. It's proven in science that if you stick with it, if you continue to have that optimism and that ability to keep going, you're going to see improvement. You're going to see yourself get better and better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool. So gratitude journal. Give me another, Cory. I like this. What are some of your favorite activities that you've seen proven out as like things that students should just be aware of?
Yep.
No.
And I would say this one is definitely more of something you should just be aware of and work on as opposed to an actual activity to implement. But when it comes to teamwork, be mindful of your body language, because your body language goes very far in terms of your reaction to a question or to a conversation with someone. Your nonverbal cues are the first thing that someone sees even before the words come out of your mouth. So just be mindful of how you react, whether it be your eyes or your body language. Just be mindful of that. And there are certainly activities that you can find to help improve that body language. But again, this is something that you're going to have to go through with experience, and always be thinking about it while you're actively listening to make sure, am I giving away my thoughts with my body language, or is my body language saying something that I'm not intending? Because that's another big one.
That makes, wow, that's really cool. I mean, tell me in the chat, have you guys noticed that? Do you guys like perceive body language in a way, or just are you aware of it? I mean, can you give me some more examples, Cory? Like, are we talking like really obvious ones like eye rolling, or like slouching back, not really being engaged? Like, are there some that really stand out to you more than others? I know as a teacher, I'm always on the lookout for it, just eye contact, whether there's like, trying to stay in the game or whatnot. But are there some that you guys focus on more than others?
Yeah, I would say well, the obvious ones are stuff like eye rolling and slouching if you're not taking the conversation seriously. But there are some other ones too, specifically, as we're living in a more technological world here. Something that I try to do when I'm in the office is, if someone comes in to speak with me, I'll make an effort to either shut my computer or roll away from the desk so I'm not distracted, because we've all been in meetings or group project meetings where it's pretty clear that whoever we're speaking to is also on another tab at the same time. And that really sends the wrong message. No matter how busy we are, we need to be able to focus on the conversation at hand. And it really says a lot to the other person if you don't, pay attention to what they're talking about.
I'm guilty of that. And I try, I can do a better job for sure. But just the act of closing your laptop or turning your phone upside down, right? I just did that on, and just saying, you got me, right? Like, I'm engaged with you, can go a long way in building that relationship that you're talking about. That's what you're getting at, Cory? That's sounds important.
Exactly that. Yeah.
Keeping eye contact. Yeah, I see some people chatting in. Looking at the phones. That's hard, right? Whether you're trying, whatever it is, if it's school, work, or even a personal relationship, it's like, are you even listening to me? Are you there? Right? Okay, I like that. What else? What else you got here, Cory? What else you got in your bag of activities that you can get at? And I got one. I got a question. If you don't have one, for sure.
No, I can certainly go through some more, but let's hear your question then.
Okay, so. Well, okay, give us one more, and then let's get to the question, because we already kind of did it there. Yeah.
Okay, so we spoke about it a little bit when we brought up grit earlier in the hour, but the difference between grit and resilience really is, grit, I would say, is more in the preparation and the ability to set an effective SMART goal.
You totally just read my. Okay, that's crazy, because I was just going to ask about setting goals and get back to that full circle. Keep going. Okay, keep going. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think the definition of SMART goal and what those different letters of the acronym mean vary a little bit, but I think we all know what it means. We want our goals to be measurable, attainable, relevant, time-based. So really, but put into practice, that's really where the value comes from, right? So if I know that my long-term goal is to get into grad school or to be a CFO of a company, what are the small steps that I can break down in order to help myself get there? And those small steps, the proof is in the pudding with those. If each week I'm reading another book and about how to manage a company from the financial perspective, that can really help me over time understand what I need to do as a CFO. And then over time, as I build off of that a little bit, maybe the first thing I do is get into a company in the accounting realm or a different area within the financial services realm. So setting an effective SMART goal and being well versed in how to do that really goes a long way, because once we get into resilience, that's when it's talking about going into adversity and how do we respond to that. But grit, a lot of it is in the preparation.
So do you set goals for everything you do, Cory? Like what are some of, like, how far do you go with this?
No, I would definitely don't set goals for everything. I think I'm not sure how healthy of a lifestyle that would be if you're always looking towards a goal in every area of your life. But I would say that when it comes to your big, uh, the things that you want to accomplish and the things that you know it's going to take a lot of work, you need to have a plan for how you're going to achieve that work. And that starts with school for students. It definitely goes into the workforce after that. So I would say anything where you know there's going to be a lot of work that you need to be organized and meticulous with, that's where grit comes into the play, and it starts with your preparation.
So let me push back, not really push back, but let me dig into that a little bit more. Are you talking goals then, like, so one goal that I try to set for students is like do 100 questions a week. It's not even getting them right. It's just doing 100 questions a week, building that habit. Or is it like 10,000 steps a day, that kind of goal? Although, I know the 10,000 steps maybe not proven, but it's good to have these goals to work towards and just to measure the what you're spending time in. Is that what we're talking about here, Cory? Like what
Yep.
specifically, like, can
Yeah.
you give just maybe an example of like a specific goal? Like, does that question one sound right to you? Or
Question one is good. I think something that we all are pretty familiar with by now is Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours. So, how do you
Hmm.
actually improve and become a master of your craft? I think that's a really effective way of thinking about it. I don't know if every individual goal needs 10,000 hours, but if you're talking about something like becoming a really good guitar player, there's no way to do that unless you're putting in the hours. Same thing with any skill development like that. But something a little bit more, when we're talking about SMART goals, what are the measurable steps that I can take today? So with a guitar, it might be practicing 3 hours today, but with trying to think of a good example of something not more of a technical skill, perhaps, attaining some job or getting into grad school, you might want to think about, oh, what's my task I need to complete today? Is it even filling out the application? Because that does move me forward.
I like where the direction you went with that. So Malcolm Gladwell, that 10,000 hour rule, I think, comes from his book Outliers, right? It's one of his books. And I was actually going to ask you, where can students go to learn more? So we are, we got about 10 minutes and change remaining. So tell us in the chat. I see a few questions I'm going to address now, but where can students get more? So I know for grit, I don't know if you like this one. I know Angela Duckworth has a book on grit that's sitting on my desk right now that I'm trying to make my way through. There's a ton of books out there that are just focused on being more aware of your coworkers, being more aware of their situations. And Malcolm Gladwell, I think, is a really good read as well. Are there any other places where students can go to make sure that they're getting the right kind of information about this? Or is it good enough to just go on, like the bestseller list and see which ones people are touching up on?
Yeah, I would say a couple of things, Dennis. I would say that there's another one. I think the overarching theme here that we're talking about is, knowing that these skills can improve, and that's the definition of growth mindset. So
That's
I think there's a great talk by Carol Dweck, who's a psychology professor at Stanford, that I would encourage everybody to start with. And there, without a doubt, you named a lot of the area experts, and you can find a lot of great TED talks and stuff like that. But I would say that as important as reading up on these things is just exposing yourself to a myriad of different experiences and making yourself uncomfortable and doing things that maybe you're not as attuned to doing normally, and working on those weaknesses. We see a lot of times that I'm a youth basketball coach, so that's where a lot of my examples come from. We oftentimes don't recommend that parents keep a child in just that one sport. You want to diversify. So if a child is a basketball player, put them into soccer, put them into baseball, and not only will those different experiences kind of improve their hand-eye coordination and some of those technical skills for sports, but it's just the recognition of different experiences and being ready for them going forward. So without a doubt, read up, watch TED Talks, listen to podcasts, but also don't forget to put them into practice also.
Yeah, the three books we mentioned, I know Jin's asking specifically, are Carol Dweck. That one's sitting on my desk as well. That's Dweck as in Dweck, and it's just a book on mindset, growth mindset in particular. I think that's a really, really, really good one to frame things up. The one I mentioned was Angela Duckworth, spelled kind of the way you think it would be, and it's the title is just Grit. So if you just Google it, I'm pretty sure it'll come up as the first entry. And then Malcolm Gladwell is a really interesting one. There's a lot of people who have taken. So his rule is essentially, if you do something for 10,000 hours, you can become like a world expert on it. So there's people who have, like, there was one guy, I don't know what happened to him. He gave up his entire career and decided to start playing golf for 10,000 hours and wanted to become like a PGA Tour member or whatever it is. So I definitely get out there. But I love your point, Cory. It's not just about books, right? Because that sounds kind of stuffy and boring, right? No one wants to hear high school. Go out there and read more books, because I'm sure there are plenty of books they need to read anyway. But go out there and just experience, right? Get uncomfortable. Get outside the comfort zone. Go out and do things and learn about different kinds of people. To me, I have a 7-year-old, so that definitely is something that makes sense, and I try to do all the time. But okay, let's get to some of these questions. I love this. So I've been neglecting them for a little bit, Cory. So looks like I always want to be active and answer questions during class, but my vocabulary isn't that good, so I feel insecure. Any thoughts on that? Any words of advice for this guest?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like that's somewhat, definitely not an easy one, but more of a simple one to improve on. You need to improve your vocabulary. There are a lot of ways that you can do that. Read, and I think a lot of times when we're talking about improving something, Dennis, we think about going as difficult or as hard into it as we possibly can. But I think a lot of the research indicates that we should just be at the upper levels of our comfort zone. So don't go, if you're looking at improving your vocabulary, don't read a book that you don't understand any of the words, but read a book that's a little bit difficult for you. Have a dictionary nearby. And again, I'm not an educator, so I'm just thinking of ways that make sense to me right now. Have a dictionary nearby and underline words you don't know, or just look them up as you go along, and you can improve your vocabulary that way. But you're an educator, so maybe you can speak to that one.
Listen, Cory, you may not be an educator, but you are doing the work that it's already today making students' lives, they're working towards a meaningful set of skills. So I think that's really crucial. And that's great. And I agree. Like, I think even TED Talks, like we were talking about earlier, Cory, being able to hear other people talk about what you want to talk about is a great way to just emulate and get more. A lot of it's about just your comfort level, right? It's a lot of it's just like, have I said this word before? Because if you haven't, chances are it's going to come out bad or come out wrong or come out different. And then just sticking with it. I will say there are many times when I say a lot of dumb things, but you got to learn from it. You got to realize that's okay, and you got to be able to stick with it and not run away from the areas that you're uncomfortable with, right? So I love that. Doing push-ups every day. I mean, that's back stretches. I mean, that sounds right, Cory? I mean, that sounds like it doesn't all have to be about school. I think your physical health has a lot to do with your ability to do well in the classroom. Is that right, Cory?
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. Things like exercise and sleep, I think maybe not at ACT, but there's a lot of research that goes into how that helps the entire development of not only a student but a person.
Yeah, and we already have peer-to-peer support here. We have a student who says, I don't care if I get it right or wrong, but at least teachers know I'm making an effort. I think that's so important, right, Cory? Does that resonate with you as well? Like, is that true? Is that something that,
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, putting yourself out there goes a long way.
And then getting a girlfriend by the end of college. I don't know how much, it couldn't hurt, right? Being optimistic, doing a lot of push-ups, doing a lot of back stretches, probably can't hurt you in the long run, right? Just being an open-minded, empathetic person who doesn't give up.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Cool. Let's keep rolling. So we have looked at a wide range of things. We looked at the 5 skills that you focus on. We've got grit, which is just sticking it through with your goals, just building the habits, having attention to detail. We've got resilience, which you've talked about is when something bad happens, are you able to manage your emotions? Are you able to stress manage? And a lot of that has to deal with just recognizing the positives, having that gratitude journal. That's something that you really push for. I like that. I made a note of that. Teamwork is about understanding others, right? It's not even just about what you do. It's about how can you make others understand the goal that you have at hand, and that ties right into leadership. Leadership is not just about being the one, the MVP, or the one who's ordering people around. It's about being optimistic. It's about being empathetic. It's about being understanding everything that you go here. Sorry, I'm kind of rattling it off. I'm trying to make sure I internalize it. And then curiosity, which you said, not so sexy, but just this ability to dive into things that you are bad at and just be comfortable, not comfortable with, but getting out there is so important. You said it brings everything together, right? It ties everything together. How am I doing so far? How am I doing so far?
No, you're doing great. I
Okay.
would say that the two adjectives I would say with curiosity the most are open-mindedness and that ability to embrace diversity. I would say those are the two big ones, and those can obviously all translate to the other four skills as well.
Yeah, I gotta say, when I talk to students, it's hard for me sometimes to make them believe that these are important. And so it's great to have you here to be talking about how there are studies done by Google, there are studies done by the ACT, there are studies done by so many organizations out there, and why this is important and why this ties into all the things that you're looking for. So I don't know. I love this. What are any other specific things that we can give them in the last few minutes that we have? And someone says they're thankful for the session. They said they're going to write that in their gratitude journal. So Cory, I mean, someone's listening, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say the main takeaway, because you're right about one thing in particular here, Dennis, is that uh, we hear from educators and from students and from parents all the time. Why is it important to focus on these things? And I think that's the wrong question. I think we're already focusing on these things, and you're already doing these things as an educator and as a parent, but doing them with a little bit more of an intentional approach. That's the question we should be asking. And the answer to it is we do see it pay dividends for the student. But it's not like you're not working on SEL skills just because you're not looking at grit. The SEL skills are there. It's not something that we can escape from in any way. It's not something that we should want to escape from, but being intentional with how we're approaching improving your grit, improving your resilience, and so on and so forth. That's the question that we should be asking.
I just got the chills. I mean, I know this is not the most exciting topic, but like as a parent and as an educator, you know, we're told so much that test scores are all that matters, or that grades are all that matters. And, they've got all these like placement tests and all that. And I want to say, I don't believe that, right? Like even for my son, I'm always telling him, like, just make mistakes, go out there and make mistakes, learn from them. If it's too easy for you, then find something that's harder. Like, it's okay if it feels bad, because like that's how you learn, and that's how you grow. And so talking to you, Cory, I think it reassures me, right? It reassures me that there is studies that back this up, that this does matter, that it does pay dividends, even though it may not pay dividends in like a score right off the bat. But like you said, it's not just about school. It's not just about college. It goes beyond that. It goes into the workplace, and being able to match your passion up with the hard work and determination. I don't know, that's my biggest takeaway from this, that it really does matter, right?
And I would love, yep, and I agree with that 100%. And I think that if we all make it matter a little bit more for ourselves, we have better schools, we have better, happier people in the workplace that do better work. And I think that's the takeaway. Absolutely.
Man, I would love to have you back, and maybe we can, like, I feel like I could spend an entire hour just talking about just leadership, or like different aspects of it, and how we can deal with individual case studies or specific situations. I don't know. I feel like, let me know in the chat if that's, let us know, like, what are the things that you want to keep hearing from Cory about, and other folks, in terms of how you're going to be able to build the skills you need beyond just being able to study well or cram well or memorize a lot of facts. I wish someone would have told me all this many, many years ago. And I'm glad that we're moving closer to the world where data backs up prioritizing this in our daily lives. But all right, so with 2 minutes to go, I just want to say a couple things. I mentioned this at the start. I've been teaching test prep for over a decade, well over a decade now. And, for a lot of students, this is the biggest thing that they need, right? They have the content knowledge that they need because they're successful in school. How many of you know that your GPA is awesome, but you just don't test well, or that's what you tell yourself anyway, or that's what someone's told you in the past? Like, you can get better at everything in regards to tests and really any area that you're uncomfortable with. And what I want to just make sure you hear from both of us is that don't let those obstacles hold you back. I mean, that's where resilience kicks in. That's where your ability to say, I'm not good at this today, but step by step, I'm going to be able to take that forward. That's a one practical translation that I want to put out there. Cory, is there anything you'd say in final words to kind of like back up that sentiment? Like, I know we've said a lot of the things already, but is there one last piece of advice that you want all the students out there to hear just in regards to the skills they need?
Yeah, I would say just with everything we've spoken about today, don't get caught up on the actual words or the definitions. We all know what we need to improve on, and we know what it takes in order to do that. I think a lot of times we are somewhat paralyzed by reading about self-improvement and doing things we need to do. We just need to put it into practice. That's what I would say more than anything.
That's right. And that's awesome. And speaking about practice, guys, I do want to make sure you guys know that the deadline for the ACT is now October 8th. So if this is something that that's been holding you back, I got to connect it back to the ACT somehow, right? So if this is a test that you know you can succeed on and crush with just some grit, some resilience, and really just be able to take the steps necessary to do the practice, look, go do the research. We're going to throw it out there and let us know how we can help you get to the goals that you're trying to get to make sure you're successful in college and beyond. Anyway, thanks, guys. This is Dennis and Cory signing off. We'll see you next time. Have a good one and enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Go out there and get uncomfortable, I guess, right? Keep at it.